Welcome to Alan Skorsky Reports. I'm Alan Skorsky. As another week has passed since Donald Trump moved back into the White House, once again he has shown America and the world that when he says something, he means it. During the campaign, President Trump promised he would combat anti-Semitism head on, especially on college campuses. In the last 2 weeks, the administration canceled $400 million that was earmarked for Columbia. Last week, the State Department, under Secretary of State Marco Rubio, revoked the green card of Hamas agent and alleged student Mahmoud Khalil. During this time, other universities, including Harvard and Columbia, have promised to take combating anti-Semitism more seriously. Under the leadership of President Trump, his Attorney General Pam Bondi, Leo Terrell, Linda McMahon, they have all put major universities on notice that their credentials and financial support would be on the chopping block unless they took decisive action to protect the civil rights of their Jewish students. In fact, Leo Terrell recently announced that his department will be investigating 60 universities, including 11 in California, on suspicion of their failure to protect Jewish students. With us today is one of the leaders who put universities on notice, Shabbos Kestenbaum. Shabbos, if you'll recall, rocked the RNC convention last summer, exposing the gut rot taking place at Harvard, the very university he is currently in litigation with. Shabbos has traveled the world, meeting with Jewish groups and world leaders, including Israel's Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu. Shabbos, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Always good to be here.
Okay, so first thing is because there's so many things that you've been involved with. I'm going to start with the softball. You and a group met with the Prime Minister of Israel and other leaders, and you said to him that the Jewish organizations, I'm paraphrasing what you're saying basically, that they are not the future in combating anti-Semitism, and that the Jewish youth, they are the future. So I'm going to let you explain that.
Yeah, I said it because I meant it, and I meant it because it's true. Young American Jews particularly on college campuses, are the ones who are flying the Israel and American flag in places where would be relatively hostile. They're the ones talking about Zionism in places where you don't talk about Zionism. They're the ones who, after October 7th, have taken the mantle of leadership. They're testifying in front of the United States Congress. They're giving speeches to major audiences. They're meeting with world leaders and allies. So we are doing it without training. I shouldn't say we. They are doing it without training. They're
Right.
doing it not because they're spokesmen, not because they're good at what they do, simply because they feel it in their heart and in their soul. And as I told the Prime Minister, and as I try to tell anyone who will listen, young American Jews are not tomorrow's leaders. They are today's leaders. So many of them, okay, now I will include myself, have felt down by the Jewish leadership, by the nonprofit establishment. And it's quite telling that when Prime Minister Netanyahu came to the United States, he did not meet with any of them. He met with Jewish students. And it is our responsibility to uplift, to amplify, and empower young American Jews. Because as I said, they're not tomorrow's leaders. They're not going to do this in the future. They are doing it right now. And they're doing it with a horse-string budget. They're doing it with tremendous amounts of hostility and discouragement. And nevertheless, they are succeeding in ways that the Jewish nonprofit could only have dreamt of.
So it's a great point you're making. I'm going to tell you why. I was having a conversation about a month ago with a friend of mine from the ZOA. They're running for the World Zionist Congress. And so I Googled the Conference of Presidents of Jewish Organizations. There are at least 50 groups there. And I asked her, do any of them do anything? And, I get emails from AJC. That's either American Jewish Committee or Congress. Who the hell knows? I get their email saying, help us combat anti-Semitism, blah, blah, blah. Send us a donation. But they don't do a damn thing. And you and your peers have just basically have been fighting the storm. So now here's a question, because this has been going on since I was in college, going back 40 years ago. There are many, when I was in college, Wayne State University in Detroit, there were about a dozen pro-PLO, Muslim, and communist student organizations. Today, I'm familiar with Students for Justice in Palestine. I know there's a Muslim Student Association, and then there's Mahmoud Khalil, who we'll talk about later, his organization, Columbia University Apartheid Divest. So you've got, I don't know how many organizations are on campus now. I know at Harvard you also have a law student association. How many groups are active now? And what would you say is our path towards fighting them back, fighting against them? Because again, there's one Shabbos Kestenbaum. There are others who are active, but you've become the leader of the student movement.
Oh,
Just
well,
accept it. I'm not buttering you up. It's accept the compliment because it's sincere.
sure. So I'll say this in terms of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic groups, SJP alone, the Students for Justice in Palestine, have hundreds of different chapters across the country. They're a direct affiliate of the AMP, the American Muslims for Palestine, which itself is a direct subsidiary of Hamas and the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps. It's not hyperbole, it's not speculation. If you look at the Holy Land Foundation trial, there was a clear, cut and dry case whereby there was a direct line of the money that they received from the IRGC and from Hamas directed to the AMP, and then in turn the AMP sends that to a litany of smaller groups like SJP within our lifetime. So SJP alone, hundreds within our lifetime. I don't know if they have campuses, if they have chapters on campuses. I don't believe they do, but nevertheless, they have a significant amount of manpower, certainly concentrated in New York City, which is why Columbia University, in particular, is such a hotbed of extremism and lawlessness. In terms of the response, there are not enough, both qualitatively and quantitatively. There are not enough Jewish students and Jewish groups that are really responding in a forceful way that we need, which is really going back to the earlier question you raised, which is, what do the American Jewish nonprofit groups do? And what I will say is, fine, it might be true they're not doing enough, but we do know is they have a lot of money. I was on a panel a few months ago. I won't say his name, with the CEO of a major Jewish nonprofit, and he brags about the money that he raised, his organization raised post October 7th. In the back of my head, I'm thinking while I'm on this panel, well, what have you been doing with the money? Because the
Right.
amount of students who come to me on a daily basis asking me if I know how they can raise $500 for a tabling event on campus, $500 to bring in a speaker, and they just can't do it. Meanwhile, the SJPs and the Palestine Solidarity Committee and the Apartheid Divestment Coalition, they're raising an extraordinary amount of money. And just in terms of manpower, they have lots and lots of people on these campuses. So litigation is one of the ways that Jewish students are responding, but litigation is quite revealing because I won't use Harvard as an example, but let's say you use UCLA, there are less than 5 Jewish students who are suing, and not all those plaintiffs are even named. There's a tremendous amount of trepidation and hesitancy, and this is not a criticism of those Jewish students, but we are not as willing to go out with our faces, with our names, and to make the pitch and make the case for the Jewish state. And this might sound a little counterintuitive, but we certainly need to take a lesson from the Palestine playbook. In the same way that they are animated, enthusiastic, passionate about their cause, Jewish young people need to respond at the same level. And many are, certainly many have risen to the occasion, but we need a lot more. And I think the funding and I think the leadership from the Jewish nonprofit can help us reach that goal. But right now, they're not doing that.
Right. So, it's funny. We had this conversation I had with some leaders many years ago. We said the difference between our students and their students that they go there with an agenda. It's all been coordinated before they even get their first day in college. Whereas, why do Jews go to college? We go to get a degree, to get an education, so we can go out in the world and become prosperous. And if we're lucky, meet a girl. That's always been, so we've never gone there as part of a planned movement to take over a university. Now, something that I want to read to you because I was reading that Columbia now and Harvard, they're all going to start adopting the International Holocaust Remembrance. Uh, what was it?
The
The IH. Go ahead.
International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism.
All right. Okay. So now here's two of the things that caught my attention. Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor. And now another point is drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. Well, those two alone would ban every single Arab and Muslim group on campus because that is who they are and that is why they are there. And that's what all of their demonstrations are about.
Yeah, so the yes and no. The IRA definition is an important step. Number one, we have to realize the only reason that institutions like Columbia and Harvard even adopted the IRA definition was not because of their own goodwill, it's because students sued them. Columbia wants to prove that we take anti-Semitism seriously, so they adopted IRA. With NYU did this as a response to a lawsuit. Harvard University also did this in response to the settlement where they would agree to adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. It's also interesting to note that the heads of the Harvard Anti-Semitism Anti-Semitism Task Force, Jared Elias and Derek Pensler, were secretly telling donors and high-level administrators that they were hoping that our lawsuit would be successful and that we would be the ones to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So the blame comes to us and not on Derek Pensler and Jared Elias because they're too scared to actually implement it themselves. They didn't want the criticism. The thing is, the IHRA definition was only implemented in response to conduct. So if a student, for example, physically assaults a Jewish student at Harvard Business School, which happened, there's video of it, in response to that event, when Harvard administrators look at punishing or disciplining the students, which of course they haven't done, they would then implement the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. There are two problems. Number one is it's not being enforced. So we already saw post-settlement, post the adoption of the IHRA definition, students blatantly violating the non-discrimination and anti-bullying policies and the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Forget about Harvard didn't discipline those students. They didn't even respond to these obvious violations of the internal policy and of their new law. And the second problem is, as I said, this only pertains to implementing discipline and consequences after the fact. But we need discipline before it even happens. We need deterrent. We need to make sure that students and professors don't even think to discriminate or to harm any student, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, black, white, it doesn't matter. And the problem is, as I said, there's just no accountability, there's no enforcement, and we will continue to see these universities not upholding their own internal policies unless there is strong action either by the litigation, either by the federal government, or a revolt of the donor base. So the IHRA definition is a good first step, but we still have a lot of work to do.
So here's another question. The students who are fighting today, what are they? Are they fighting anti-Semitism? Are they fighting the protests? Are they fighting the lies about the protests? As an example, every university has like National Apartheid Week. Okay, that's falsely accusing Israel of apartheid. Are we fighting that? Are we fighting the encampments? What is it that we are focusing on that the students are saying we can fight this battle, but we can't fight this battle because they're being hit from so many different positions?
It's a good question. And in fact, Israel Apartheid Week is coming up. It usually happens during the holiday of Passover, which is intentional. That's the point. Look, so many students, myself included, have expressed this frustration because it sort of seems like what we've been doing on campus is putting out fires. We're simply responding to allegations,
Right.
accusations, but we actually have to take back the narrative. We have to be the ones coming out in the forefront and saying, look, Israel is a diverse, democratic, progressive nation state. If anything, it's the greatest example of decolonization in human history. But we're not doing that. We're simply responding to professors and classmates saying, well, they just bombed the hospital. And simply being on the defense not only is not productive, but it actually hurts the cause because, as I said, we are being defined by our ideological adversaries. And these are adversaries that do not care about the truth, that do not want the facts to be promoted or promulgated. And that's where this frustration lies into place. So again, I don't want to paint a broad brush, but there are many students who are doing their best with their limited resources to, as I said, control the narrative, to actually go up there and say, Israel is something, if you're a progressive, if you're a liberal, is something you should be celebrating. 20% of the country is Arab with full rights. We have emancipation for women. We have total LGBTQ plus equality. Druze, Christian, Muslim, Jews, they all serve together in the Israel Defense Forces. But it's hard to do that when the classroom, when the professors are indoctrinating their students with this groupthink ideology that there is no greater evil than Western imperialism and settler colonialism, and there is no greater manifestation of that than the state of Israel. So we're trying to fight back, we're trying to control the narrative, but the odds are stacked up against us. That should not come as a surprise. Jews on campuses are outnumbered, both quantitatively, and then we're also outgunned. We do not have the resources, we do not have the organizational talents that the other side does. So it's a tremendous challenge.
So now you raised a few more issues, and I'm gonna go back to my own personal experience. The way we were active back then, we had student showcases in the student center building, and every week groups would rent them, and then we put up whether it was a frat group or an activity group, activist group. So I used to pull information from the book From Time Immemorial, Joan Peters' book, really thick book, and it quotes one Arab after another saying that there's no such thing as Palestine, there's no such thing as a Palestinian. It was made up to keep the Arab world at war with Israel. And to me, this is going on offense, putting in their face for all to see what the Arabs themselves have been saying. And then we once had a big display showing what the Palestinians did in Lebanon. And all of a sudden, we had Lebanese students fighting with the Palestinians on campus because all this was brought to attention. So there has to be some type of mechanism or some type of strategy on how you're going to go on offense. They like to use rhymes from the river to the sea. Well, I've got 6, 7, 8, 9. There's no such thing as Palestine. But you have to hit them with it though, whatever works, because now from the river to the sea, I mean that's part of it. You could probably Google it, and it's going to have a whole thing in there because it's no longer some crazy Mother Goose poem used by Palestinians. So that's part of the I think how you become aggressive and you take the lead. If you want to say yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Jews need to start being on the offense. And we have a secret tool in our arsenal, which is Israel itself. Because everything that the progressive left wants of a Palestinian state, Israel already does those things and more. And it's just silly that we have to spend so much of our time combating lies, misinformation, and disinformation, the deliberate spread of lies, in order to create a narrative whereby if you care about reproductive rights, if you care about LGBTQ emancipation, if you care about climate change, then all of those things are Palestinian issues. Palestine has become this great
Right.
omnibus where any societal ill is simply just gravitated towards, well, if we can just free Palestine from the river to the sea, it sort of takes care of all the other issues. And again, it's just so frustrating because the issues that they truly care about, Israel's addressing them. And Israel is a world leader in combating climate change. Israel is a society where LGBTQ plus individuals are fully emancipated along with women, especially in the most oppressive and regressive region in the world. But again, we just have not been successful in taking back the narrative just yet.
So you mentioned earlier a faculty. Well, that's something else that's not being addressed. Okay, you'll punish the students. So one librarian from Harvard, I think, was fired because he was seen taking down, posters. But it's the faculty and the hiring process. I know that last summer, Northwestern made a deal after they were extorted by their Palestinianists that they're going, besides offering scholarships to students, they were going to hire at least 2 professors every year who are Palestinian for the next X amount of years. So one, I would love to see if that I guess guarantee can be revoked, but we don't even know how many professors on campus. I talked to Jeff Lax from Safe Campus at CUNY. They own it. So something else that I don't know, and I don't know if how we find out, but how many faculty members are indeed affiliated with this movement. We saw at Columbia when there was a video of a student asking a professor if she supports what they're doing, and then she turned it around on him saying, these students are brave, they're risking everything. You remember the video I'm talking about? I think
Yep.
some students, yeah. So they went in to protest students who were going to be suspended, and so the faculty itself is corrosive. Whoever is hiring them, they're obviously these are the people who they want on campus. So
Yeah,
how do we even confront the the faculty aspect of it?
it's a good point. And post October 7th, you have an increasing number of campuses that are adopting FSJP, which is faculty and staff for justice in Palestine. So it's no longer students for
Sure.
justice in Palestine, but the instructors, the professors, and the faculty are getting involved as well. I remember talking about videos. There was a video that went a little viral. I believe it was at UCLA. And this professor goes on to explain that we're very proud of our students taking part in the encampments because this is everything we taught them to do. We taught them to be social justice activists. We taught them to be warriors outside of the classroom. And they're right. If you're a student and you've been fed a diet of lies for your 4 years on a college campus, that the most important thing is not to be educated, but to be an activist, then yeah, the encampments are simply a natural outcome and a natural expression of the inevitable result of that political indoctrination. So to me, and it's a good question you raised, the students and disciplining students is putting a bucket underneath a leaky roof as opposed to fixing the roof itself, because you're going to have the next iteration of students, the next cycle every 4 years
Right.
of students. If it's the same professor and the same faculty member who's saying, look, I'll cancel class and give you full credit so long as you take part in the encampments and call for an
Yep.
intifada. As long as that professor is still there, then we have a tremendous problem on our hands. In terms of the numbers, in terms of the breakdown of just how many students, or excuse me, just how many faculty or professors are affiliated with these movements or these ideologies, I don't know. I can speak anecdotally where I study at Harvard. I studied religion and politics, so the humanities was festered with this type of indoctrination and groupthink. You'd be very hard pressed to find a professor who did not support the encampments either explicitly or quietly in the confines of their classroom. So it's a tremendous problem, and that's why in our lawsuit, one of the things we talk about is you need to start disciplining faculty, not because we're out to punish people, because rules mean nothing if there is no enforcement. Whether it is a black student, a white student, a Jewish student, a Muslim student, everyone needs to be equal under the law. And that's why the case of Mahmoud Khalil is so interesting. The Syrian national who was detained by the Department of Homeland Security and is facing deportation for violating the terms of his green card, not his student visa, because his student visa already expired. Because there are two fundamental questions here. Number one is, why wasn't this done before? Why do we need a new president and a new administration in
Right.
the White House to enforce the law? But number two, much more fundamentally, is hang on a second. How did he get accepted to Columbia to begin with? Why was he on a student visa? What was it that he was promoting that made him so talented and qualified to be at one of the most, or former most prestigious and elite institutions in the United States? Where are these students and professors coming from? That's a question that will really get to the root of this issue, I believe.
Okay, so now a very important point. Um, we're going to discipline the students for a while. I'm sure that they'll nab some, they'll make examples of some of them. But here's something else that follows afterwards. For those who have already graduated, because this guy Khalil, I mean, he was pretty much almost graduated. Now you've got doctors and lawyers who are Palestinianists and Islamists. And I remember, I think 3 years ago, we did a show on this. There was a doctor, or I'm sorry, maybe an intern or resident at Case Western University in Cleveland. She put out a tweet saying that if she gets Zionist patients, she's gonna, inject them with poison. And I remember saying then, you think that she's the only one? No, she's the first one who got caught. She's the first one to be dumb enough to post all this stuff on social media. But now it's coming out everywhere. Stop Antisemitism. .com, I think that's the org, or .org, whatever it is. Every day, or Canary Mission, every day, another doctor, another doctor, another doctor. You saw the two nurses in Australia. We're not going to, I mean, is America now going to start vetting people before they admit them to the bar or to the medical association? Because you know what? If you don't do that, you're going to have an entire medical industry with people who want to kill certain types of patients.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's funny because I was speaking at a hedge fund a few days ago. They had me talk about my experience at Harvard, and during the Q&A, the majority of the audience were not Jewish, and during the Q&A, people were asking me somewhat along the lines of this thinking of, well, who are these students when they graduate? Do they continue their ideologies, or do they reform? And I said, look, leaving aside the anti-Semitism, leaving aside the Israel issue just for a moment, these are not individuals you want as colleagues sharing office space with you, working on a team project. These are individuals who are incapable of thinking critically about issues, who are incapable with disagreeing with people respectfully, or even having the conception that others can disagree with their way of thought. These are individuals that should not be in the professional space. And as
Right.
much as I said that the way you're going to transform institutions of higher learning is through the money and the donors and the endowments and the federal funds, it's also true that once the private sector, and I believe this is already happening, once the private sector through the free market simply says, well, we're not going to hire these individuals. We don't like the fact that you have students at Harvard who are physically assaulting other Jews on campus. We don't like the fact that students are blocking the entrances of libraries and classrooms, telling, Zionists off our campus. And people often forget, but they were more than a dozen law firms shortly after President Gay's disastrous congressional testimony in December of 2023, who put out a very public letter saying that you either crack down on the anti-Semitism and the lawlessness on your campus, or we're not going to hire you. And
Right.
even one firm that went so far to actually rescind job offers to Harvard students who took part in this chaos and lawlessness. And that is the best way we are going to get out of this. Because, yes, universities will put out statements and they might discipline a student or two, but we have to have a structural reform across the country. And at the risk of getting political, that's why I believe the reelection of Donald Trump was so imperative. Whether you love Trump or you hate Trump, his reelection was the American people repudiating the Ivy League values, the sense of moral bankruptcy and intellectual hypocrisy, the elitism. And it's a really good thing that the American people, this was happening during COVID, and it certainly accelerated afterwards, and October 7th was another catalyst, but they're migrating away from the Ivy League universities. I mean, the New York Post just had an article about students who are rejecting their offers from Columbia University. Harvard last year has had a 17% drop in early applications, 5% drop in applications overall. The American people are voting with their feet, and they're saying that we just don't want to go to these institutions. We don't want to be associated with them. I cannot tell you how many graduates of Columbia and Harvard and Yale and Penn who've come up to me, and I don't just mean Jews, who've said, I don't really tell people I went to Penn. I don't really tell people I went to Columbia, because there's this understanding that these institutions have so defamed themselves.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes or so left. Question. Harvard recently settled with some of your peers, but you are not settling with them. Tell us what is going on with your lawsuit as it goes on with Harvard.
Sure. So, as you just said, my co-plaintiffs decided to take the settlement. I'm glad that Harvard met two of my demands. One was what we spoke about, the implementation of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which equates that anti-Semitism is obviously, anti-Zionism is obviously anti-Semitism. And the second demand was that Harvard University have an official partnership with an Israeli university. We did that because currently Harvard has a partnership with two universities, including Birzeit University, which student government is represented by the Hamas party. It's located in the West Bank. So we said, if you're not going to get rid of that partnership, which again speaks pretty low of Harvard and their values, then at the very least, you're going to make sure that you have a partnership with an Israeli university. However, I had other demands, and Harvard was not willing to make those demands. While I can't get into the details because I signed a non-disclosure agreement, fundamentally, I'm not asking for special treatment under the law. I'm asking for equal treatment under the law. All of the things that I'm demanding are things that Harvard should have done irrespective of a lawsuit, things they should have done even before October 7th, but they refused to treat Jewish students equally under the law. And if Harvard does not want to make those concessions, that's their prerogative. But I essentially said, lose my number and I'll see you in court. The judge ruled in July that we will go to trial. We're the first case in American history pertaining to the civil rights violations of Jewish students on a college campus to actually go to trial. And I'm not really interested in derailing that. I'm not really interested in a slap on the wrist and pretending that we'll let bygones be bygones and we reached an understanding and there was no wrongdoing. Of course there was wrongdoing. That's why I sued them. If I and the other plaintiffs didn't think there were wrongdoing, then they wouldn't have signed it. And I'll tell you the obvious. The co-plaintiffs, who are anonymous, they signed as part of the settlement a letter that said, there's no ill will with Harvard. We admit no wrong. They don't believe that either. But they were told to do it by their lawyers because that's how the settlement works. Of course they know that Harvard did wrong. That's why we sued them to begin with. So we're going full steam ahead. The first step is discovery. So we want to see, why is it that Harvard University continuously hires, as you said, these anti-Semitic professors? Why is it they don't discipline students for anti-Semitism, but they do discipline students for racism or homophobia or misogyny? Why is it that they receive hundreds of millions of dollars from anti-democratic, anti-Western, anti-Semitic countries, Russia, China, Qatar, Saudi Arabia? So that's discovery. That's step number one. Based on what we discover during that process, that will influence part two, which is the depositions. So I very much would like to have people like Claudine Gay or Alan Garber under oath testifying in front of a judge why it is they did certain things, and then eventually we'll get to trial. We're demanding a trial by jury. Our lawsuit is publicly available online. Your readers can read it themselves. But I am not interested in derailing this. I'm not interested on a slap on the wrist. I'm making sure that no student, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Black, white, has to go through what I went through.
Now, there's something else that I would love to see done, and I think it might be doable. As we know, Donald Trump doesn't care what everyone, with the conventional wisdom of the State Department thinks. He'll do whatever he wants, whether it's recognizing Jerusalem, now it's talking about recognizing Judea and Samaria. There's something that I would love to see done, and a few years ago I thought impossible, but maybe someone like Tom Cotton, because he's the one that likes to lead these things, that the White House comes out with an official policy now that Palestine never existed, that the whole cause started in 1964. Like, it just exposed that we're not playing this game anymore. UNRWA has been there since 1948, keeping the Palestinians as refugees, which was part of them maintaining this war against Israel. There was never a state called Palestine, and now we're going to start from there. And if you don't like it, then we'll do something about it. But there has to be some type of declaration that says we're done with this game here. We're not, Democrats can talk about two states all they want. That can be easily dissected and why it's folly. But that would be a great way to move forward, saying, you know what, we're done with this. Here's the facts. Here's the history. Go ahead. I know you want to say
No,
something.
I totally agree with you. I mean, Senator Tom Conn's a good example because he actually proposed, I don't know if it was simply a resolution or an actual bill that would prohibit the United States government and any of its agencies from calling the West Bank anything other than Judea and Samaria
Yeah.
to sort of dissuade anyone from this fantasy of, there is this West Bank because it's West in comparison to the
Right.
Jordan River
Peter Beinart himself admitted that, and he
right,
hates
exactly.
Israel.
It denotes or it negates, I should say, the ancestral connection that the Jewish people have with their homeland. So that's a great piece of legislation. We also know that the Trump administration has permanently frozen any assets or, excuse me, any funding to UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency. So I think you are seeing that. It may not be in one bill, but you're seeing, smaller pieces all over. And there is this new thinking. There's been a paradigm shift as a response to Trump's reelection and the new administration that, yeah, we are not going to indulge in people's fantasies. We see that not just with the issue of Palestine. We see it with the issue of transgenderism. We see it with the behavior that college campuses have capitulated in and capitulating and acquiescing to the demands of the radical loud minority on college campuses who are insisting in intifada and divestment. We are not going to engage in people's fantasies. And I think that's really good, pragmatic and smart policy. You can believe what you want, you can say what you want, but we are not going to entertain it. We are not going to support it with American taxpayer funding. So you think river to the sea, I mean, go for it, but we're not going to support your university. Or you can say that, there are 12 genders, great, but we're not going to accommodate that in public spaces.
Right.
So as Donald Trump himself said, I believe it was during his speech at the inauguration, I want a revolution in common sense. And Democrat, Republican, liberal, or conservative, I think we can all concede that the last 4 years, we have lost touch of reality and common sense and truth. And it's so ironic because, of course, Harvard's slogan, its motto is Veritas, Latin for truth. And
Right.
they so strayed from that core principle, that core mandate and mission of regardless of your sexual orientation and your race and your ethnicity, we study truth. And they just don't do that anymore.
Shabbos, we've got about 5 minutes left. I know tonight you're speaking in Queens, New York, along with a film called Frontline Warriors. Would you please tell us about that film and your involvement with it?
Sure. So I'll be speaking about the film on a panel together with Assemblyman Sam Berger. He's a New York State Assemblyman from Queens, great guy. And Frontline Warriors, a film documenting the story of three Jewish students on college campuses. Myself at Harvard, Eden Yadiger from Columbia University, and Eli Tsivis from UCLA. We talk about our stories. We talk about, more broadly speaking, the future of the Jewish people, and in particular, it's in the hands of young people. Why was this documentary made? Because I'm sure you and your listeners have probably heard and seen a bunch of documentaries made in the last year about campus anti-Semitism. There's October 8th, there's Blind Spot, there's Red, White, and Jew, just to name three off the top of my head. This one is unique because it is made in conjunction with Aisha Am. Aisha Am is a brand new slate, a coalition that is running for the World Zionist Congress. The World Zionist Congress is something probably your listeners don't know because I myself didn't really know about it. It's pretty poorly run. They could use some good PR. But essentially, it's the international body of the Jewish people. They allocate more than $1 billion on an annual basis to Jewish and Israeli causes. And the American people, the American Jewish community can vote their values, vote for who they want as their representatives. And so I am running with this brand new slate called Aisha Am. We are the largest collection of American Jewish students ever assembled. The World Zionist Congress meets every year. Their first Congress was in 1897 in Basel, Switzerland. Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism, gives a speech at that first Congress where he says that Zionism will only be able to sustain itself if young people are involved. And so we are the youngest slate. We are not leaders. We are people who've experienced against anti-Semitism. So Eden Yadiger's on the slate. I'm on the slate. Eli Tzibus is on the slate, and a bunch of other Jewish students who you've seen testifying in front of Congress or on CNN or Fox News. And our argument is simple. It's the same argument that you started this interview with what we told Bibi Netanyahu. The future of Zionism and the future of Judaism is in the hands of young American Jews. We are continuing to advance the call of the Jewish homeland and Jewish democracy. So if you want to see young American Jews at the table and allocating resources because we know where it can best be used, then I would certainly encourage your listeners to think about voting for us at the Esha'am slate.
Yay! It's a good, there are a bunch of good slates, but that's certainly a great one, especially because you're on it. Anyhow, Shabbos, I know you've got a very, very crazy, hectic schedule. Everybody wants a piece of you. So thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great day. Hatzlacha tonight and in your future role as a leader of the community.
Thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate it. Take care.